Can you all hear me with this mask? Okay. Call the meeting to order today, and Ms. Coley, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Askew.
Aye, here.
Commissioner Caballero.
Here.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Here.
Commissioner Herbert.
Here.
Commissioner Simpson Brown is not here yet. Commissioner Small. Here. Commissioner Worden.
Here.
Very good. I like enthusiastic responses. The minutes were sent out in advance. I hope all of you had the opportunity to review those minutes. If not, take a moment now, but I will entertain a motion to accept the minutes, approve the minutes as submitted.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion, any changes need to be made? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. The first official action of the day is Resolution 1432, a resolution authorizing participation in the Tennessee Valley Authority's electric vehicle charging power EBC rate and amending the existing rate schedules of the electric division to provide an EBC rate schedule. This is on second reading. So, Gabe?
Thank you, Chair. Last month, Mike Boland, Vice President of Utility Advancement, provided you details of the new EV rate and charging power rate on first reading. Today, he's back to give you a brief overview of this resolution and to get your blessing on the second and final reading.
Thank you, Mr. Bolus. Give me a second.
Turned on.
Yeah, I turned it off and back on to make sure. Well, can I do it this way? I'll just do it manually. Thank you, Mr. Bolus. This is the third time I've been up here talking about this subject. The first time was just introducing electric vehicles and electric vehicle fast chargers in general. And today we're talking about Resolution 1432 on second reading. As you recall, last November, the TVA board took action, really bold action, to try to enhance the adoption of electric vehicles in the valley. One of the things they did was provide for a new specific wholesale rate for larger electric vehicle chargers. That's a wholesale rate. In order for that to actually take effect to where individual customers could use it, there needs to be a companion retail rate, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So the retail rate applies just to separately metered, larger, greater than 50 kW electric vehicle charging stations, one of which exists in Knoxville right now, another one's looking to come to Knoxville in the near future. It's separately metered. The big deal about this rate schedule as compared to normal type retail rates is it's only kilowatt hour based, only consumption based. There's no demand charge associated with it, so it results in a lower rate for these type of customers. And it's really a pass-through of TVA's lower wholesale rate down to the customer to take advantage of that. So with that, we'll have here today Resolution 1432 on second reading. If y'all so approve today, it will take effect April 1st and will be of benefit to the adoption of electric vehicles in our service territory. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Motion and second. Are there any members of the public who'd like to address the board on this particular resolution? Questions? You have something? Is that a, okay. Okay. All right, very good. Mr. Coley, will you call the roll?
Commissioner Askew.
Aye.
Commissioner Caballero.
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Small. Yes. Commissioner Worden.
Aye.
Resolution 1432 is passed on second reading.
Very good. Thank you. Now we're going to have a presentation from our friends at TVA. Is that correct?
That's correct. I would like to invite Doug Perry, the Senior Vice President of Commercial Energy Solutions, to make a brief presentation. While he's coming up, I want to recognize Amy Edge. She works as our Northeast District General Manager, and she's back there in the back. Anytime we have an issue, concern, comment, something to look into, she's our first person to contact, and she is phenomenal at responding back to us brief in such a way that we are indebted to you and appreciate what you do for us.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I was going to try to do this without my glasses, and I don't think I can. So, before I read this, let me just say how much we at TVA value our partnership with KUB. And I have really enjoyed getting to know Gabe and his staff, and the things we're doing together are really exciting. And just really look forward to bigger and greater things. And so it's my honor today to be here on behalf of TVA to present KUB with the Fiscal Year 20 Energy Right Top Performer Award. KUB is being recognized in 10 different categories and also being recognized as the top community champion. This is a new award in 2020. It honors an individual or a program partner who exemplifies the best of leadership, character, volunteerism, and public advocacy. It embodies the spirit of TVA Energy Right programs and servicing the community and goes above and beyond the standard of the call of duty. KUB's commitment to the environment, service to its community was showcased through a variety of programs such as Knoxville Extreme Energy Makeover, Residential Smart Thermostat Pilot Program, the My Energy Advisor Pilot, Green Switch Match Pilot, the Electric Vehicle Charger Rebate, just to name a few. KUB is a powerful partner, and together we make life better for the people in the Tennessee Valley. Congratulations on these awards. And so if I can invite Chair Askew to come up and CEO Bolus to come up, and I'll present you with this. Let me get my mask on. And we'll take a quick picture. And okay. Good to see
Thank you.
Absolutely. So this is the top performer in 2020. This is the community champion in 2020. So
Very good.
I'll step over if you want to say anything.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just say on behalf of our board, we are just so grateful for our partnership with TVA. We've been able to work together on so many different things, and our partnership has never been more important than it probably has been in the last year as we've all fought the pandemic, and we've tried to assist our customers who are undergoing really difficult times. So your TVA's willingness and ability to help us help our customers, the ones who are having difficulties with their bills, the way we've continued to work on weatherization projects, our Green Vest solar energy purchases, we could go on and on. We wouldn't be here without you, and we're proud to be a partner. So thank you for this recognition today.
Thank you.
Well, Jerry stole my talking points there. So anyway, no, I'll echo Jerry's comments. The collaboration between TVA and KUB is paramount. We all have great ideas, but the ability to put them to actual projects and pilots. You mentioned 4 or 5 pilots. It's because we work together on those things to offer those things to our customers. So thank you for what we do to help our low-income customers, the environmental stewardship that we so proudly are proud of here at KUB. We appreciate your partnership and look forward to more endeavors in the future. So.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Amy, come up here. Let me get a picture with you.
Yeah.
Wherever they come Thank you.
I just want you to know I had a really big smile.
I know.
All right, so, love good news days like that. All right, the next item of business is Resolution 1433, a resolution authorizing the filing of a fiber to the home business plan with the Office of the Comptroller of the Treasury for the state of Tennessee. I'll recognize Mr. Bolus again.
Yeah, Commissioners, as you know, for over a year, we have been looking into the opportunity to serve broadband to our customers throughout our entire service area. We have met individually with each of you on many occasions. We have met with our local elected officials for the last year. And we've conducted a survey. We've talked with our community advisory panel folks last month, and we have also hired some knowledgeable consultants throughout this process. We've done a lot of research. We have dug into this pretty deep and long and hard and understand a lot about the environment we're dealing with and what's going on in the nation. So today we'll be asking for your approval for submittal of a plan to the State Tennessee Comptroller's Office. As you can see, it's only one step of a lot of steps, the first step of a lot of steps. It's a lot a process, a lot of input to be gathered, a lot of data to be learned, and so we are going to be talking a lot about that today as far as what those steps look like. Before we begin, though, I want to lay this out to you. There's a lot of rationale behind this. There's a lot of infrastructure, a lot of support for this. But it begins with our electric system as a whole, and you'll hear a lot about that. It begins with the electric system. As you know, we've been putting fiber up in our system to make our system more resilient, and this accelerates it and makes it a much smarter grid for our customers in the long term. Once we can get that finished, this does allow us to do broadband. It's a very symbiotic relationship there. And so I've asked Jamie Davis to kick us off today to talk about the electric system benefits. Mark will then come up and talk about the financial endeavors to get this done, and then Jamie will come back and talk about the actual business plan that you all will be voting on later on today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jamie to begin.
Turn my mic on. Good to see you all here today and excited to talk about this subject that we've been sharing with you a lot. But as Mr. Bullis said, we'll start with really the foundational elements of the combined plan here, which really does start with our electric grid. You know, expectations for the performance of the electric grid nationally can never be higher. We only need to look at expectations around reliability, a greener grid, a more financially viable grid, and we need to look at no further than the rearview mirror of what has happened in Texas in recent weeks in that regard. And, you know, reliability expectations really have never been higher either. It's no longer just an inconvenience to be out of power for a few hours, and we need to look no further in the rearview mirror than Christmas Eve and what happened here even locally. But the good news is the last 10 years in this space have been a time of innovation. The Obama administration, through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, through the Smart Grid Investment Grant, did exactly that. It stimulated innovation in our space, and a lot has changed within the past decade. And underlying all of that innovation and applications to support these aims is a cutting-edge network that is foundational of fiber optics, and we've talked about that. That fiber network allows for a low latency, high reliability, and ultimately high-speed cutting-edge network for utility applications. So when we talk about grid modernization, it's hard for me to believe that it was about 6 years ago that I stood before this body saying, we really don't know what the industry definition of smart grid is. But for KUB at the time, it was our advanced meters that we felt like we wanted to fully deploy. It was that fiber backbone that Gabe talked about that we're still constructing. We're about halfway through of our 10-year plan there, connecting all of our substations and other critical infrastructure. And then we also knew that we wanted to start piloting some distribution automation technology that was still pretty cutting edge at the time. And I'm pleased to say now that we fast forward, where we sit today is our advanced meters are fully deployed. That fiber network is about halfway completed. And at the end of the day, we've seen some real benefits of that distribution automation technology through our smart switches and our Flisser system, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And as we look forward now to the next phase of generation, what we propose is a full deployment of that distribution automation, and then begin that next phase of pilots, if you will, which is traditionally our tradition of technology is to pilot, prove it out, and then expand it. And we think we're ready to step in and do what other utilities have done in the areas of load management and system efficiency through projects like demand response. You heard about some of them already with the awards that we're given today through whether it be smart thermostats, controllable items inside your home like a water heater or an HVAC system. And then there's some other great technologies that other utilities are using for system efficiency around voltage regulation and ultimately volt-var optimization in that particular regard. But the good news is that saves the environment, that saves money, and that's a more efficient way to run a utility system. And as you look on the horizon, there's even more things. And this is, you know, it's hard to believe that some of these things that we're talking about are even here. But if you think about what you've heard in the news in recent weeks in distributed energy resources category, we'll call it, You've heard that GM, Saab, Volvo, and I think Ford's about to announce that they're not going to make any more gasoline-fired vehicles by 2035, and that's hard to believe. Solar expansion, again, we just heard that both institutional and residential investment in solar continues to expand. That seems to be on an upward trajectory and will only continue to grow in that particular regard. Our own investments are a sign of that coming down the pike. And again, home battery expansion, and that seems really space age. But again, I'll point back to the notion of how we've seen technology evolve in the utility industry, and the notion that 10 years ago we would be hearing an announcement in today's time where, again, major auto manufacturers wouldn't be producing gasoline cars seems almost unfathomable. Well, where will we be next generation with home batteries and home energy storage in that particular regard? And even though we have a lot of folks at KUB would shudder at this thought, we won't be terribly far away from our next generation of advanced meters. We just got finished, but as that technology evolves so quickly, by the time we talk about the time frame that we would build that foundational fiber network, we very well may be within 5 to 10 years of the next generation of advanced meters. No longer is a meter really just a device for measuring consumption. It really is almost like your smartphone and the applications that it provides in that particular regard. So we're not the only ones in this space as well too. A lot of other utilities are investing in a smarter grid, both locally here in the Valley, along with in the notion of nationally. And I just provide for you a couple of key examples here. You've heard me speak about how when Chattanooga went with their smart grid program, approximately 10 years ago, they went full deployment of the devices we're talking about today. And I'll generically continue to refer those to you as smart switches, in which they've seen it on an average over a 40% improvement in reliability on their system. And we've talked about that before as well. But we need to look no further than this quarter's TVPPA magazine, our trade magazine of distributors in the Valley, in which three local Valley distributors were highlighted for their investments in this technology as well. Our neighbor to the north, Clinton, a much smaller system than ours with only 30,000 customers, say that since 2011, they've saved their customers $8.5 million using those the technologies and applications like direct load control and voltage regulation that I mentioned that we would like to start piloting as well. Duck River, again, the same kind of notion. Through the voltage regulation, they cite that it provides their members the safest and most reliable power at the lowest possible cost. And then when you think about those cutting edge technologies, again, the notion of batteries and things like that, through the flexibility of the long-term agreement with TVA, I think distributors you'll start to see do things like Middle Tennessee Electric is doing, in which they purchased a 1 megawatt Tesla battery to help manage their peaks on their particular systems. And they get a lot of questions, they cited in the article, getting a lot of questions from folks wanting to understand how a microgrid can benefit them as consumers on the grid. And in order to learn what that looks like, they're starting to invest in microgrid technologies themselves, almost like a research and development type incubator there on their system. So it's not just us that's doing this. This is really a trend across the nation. But when we talk about our local pilot of distribution automation, this is where I really get excited talking about what it's done for our customers. And we've talked about this before, but at the end of the day, these devices are smart, intelligent, operate automatically without any human intervention. They sense a fault on the line, they take action, and they keep folks in power and segment that outage. On blue sky days, we'll call them, not major event days, last year alone, they saved the devices we have out on system today, saved 1.7 million customer minutes in outages. Now, to make that a little more real and a little more near term, on a storm day, they really do shine. On the Christmas Eve storm this past year, in that event alone, these devices saved 1.1 million customer minutes of interruption. And to make that a little more understandable, just over 6,000 of our customers never saw a blink on Christmas Eve that without these switches would have. So that's meaningful, especially on Christmas Eve, if not on any other day of the year. That storm, as a reminder, had 20 million minutes of interruption, impacting at its peak about 23,000 customers. So that number could have been north of 25,000 plus customers had we not had these devices. And you say, well, that's great. Well, how many of these do we have out on system? Only about 5% or less than 5% of our electric circuits have this technology. So again, it's hard to predict where a tree is going to fall or a car is going to hit a pole, but if indeed this technology is deployed on these circuits, it can have a real meaningful benefit to our customers in that regard. So as we talk about the plans that we want to invest in these technologies, and it really is that holistic and symbiotic relationship that Gabe mentioned earlier, what you'll hear about today as part of the financing plan is we do propose a full deployment of distribution automation. That would be about 1,200 of those smart switches out on our circuits. And then we want to take a step into that new technology and reap the benefits that other utilities have. And again, I can't overstate enough how that fiber network is really the enabling technology. The smart meters are out on system now. The fiber will be able to connect our other infrastructure and devices. And so as well, because of that, we propose an expansion of our fiber network down at a much deeper level than we have in our current plans. So if we take a look at that fiber network, just to give you some specifics about it, a little bit about how big it would be and how much it would cost. It would be about 5,000 miles of distribution fiber. Our plans today to connect our substation, just in a relative economy of scale, would be that we have about 300 miles planned in our current plan. So as you can see, that's a very large extension of our fiber footprint. It would cover 675 miles of our electric service territory. It would come at a cost of about $442 million in capital. Mark, again, we'll touch on the finances here in just a second. We think to extend to everywhere in our service territory, it'd take us about 7 years to get there. And again, I continue to emphasize it's the foundation to our electric modernization. And we can't modernize the grid without that communication platform and its technology, and this really is the foundational element of that. And it is that network that ultimately does enable broadband service to be a viable opportunity for us to endeavor in. And I'd like to use just a graphic to kind of show that visually, that all of the applications that are around this fiber ring that you might see on the screen, again, require broadband to be enabled. If at the end of the day, we can't have the smart switches, advanced meterings, trouble notifications, solar panels, you name it, the expansion of EVs and understanding what the load is on our system without that fiber network. And it's, again, that fiber network that ultimately enables broadband. Funny statement is Susan Edwards says it's almost like, what do you want fries with that? And once you invest in that electric broadband network, then there's an opportunity then that electric fiber network, it enables you to do broadband.
Hey,
and that,
Jamie.
Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question now? Should we
Absolutely, please do.
So if you go back to your previous slide, what you're saying, I just want to be clear, is that we are already doing fiber, right? So as we move through this fiber, we will be adding additional fiber capability to be able to do
Yes.
fiber to home, or will we be doing this already, and then it is one of the things that we'll be able to do once we add the fiber?
I think that it's a little bit of both. So what we're doing today, again, would be about 300. What we saw as a good, wise investment and a good start in this arena was that 300 miles of investment to connect, for instance, let's just use electric substations as an example. So think of that as the interstate of the fiber network. Right. And what we're saying now is to take it deeper into neighborhoods, down onto street level, so to speak, and even to the home, positions us to be able to do many of these other applications that are there. So it very well, as we've proven out this technology, it was on our horizon to add to our Century 2 profile. Right. What's nice is that it also then enables us to use the graphic to do that broadband service as well too.
So if we think about the initial rollout, will that be on our existing fiber?
It definitely helps. It definitely helps. Where we're at with fiber now, it's a logical extension to say that indeed we would expand from there off of that core ring, if you will.
I think you said about 300, right?
We've got 150 miles out today, and it'd be at full build out of that ring will be about 300 miles.
And so we'll use that 300 as our test to make sure that we can do it, and then
we would build off of that ring at a much faster pace if we got into this business.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and it's that dual application that really makes that possible in that regard. So, great question.
Right.
And I should have said, please interrupt us. This is meant to be a workshop. We get going on like this, it's like shooting out of a fire hose, so I apologize, but thank you.
All right, so since you said that, going back to I was just writing
Do it,
questions
that's great.
down. So when you think about, we use Chattanooga as an example, EPB. Would we be the only one in this network, the only utility in this network to have 5, or does 5 utilities, or does Chattanooga also have 5 utilities?
No, Chattanooga was a little different. When they branched out, they did have already an existing telephone exchange company. A lot of folks didn't know that.
Okay.
It was very small, so they had, we'll call it officially 2, but really it was just electric from a large presence. So when they launched into this business, it was a double division there. It was their fiber division and electric. I think that I'm trying to think of others that we. What does Morristown have? Does Morristown have 5?
They don't have
So there are some that have multiple. I'd have to think if anybody has five
Five
for
is- okay.
certain.
Yeah, they have 4, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So there's really, in terms of comparison, there really is no one who would be operating, once we roll this out, in the same manner, because we have the 5 utilities. So we are from wastewater to water to electric to gas to fiber.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Mike Boland's whispering that Jackson Energy have the same setup as us
That's a-
and
okay.
have 5. And there may be another one. I just can't think of it right offhand.
Okay.
Good question. Other
Jamie,
questions? Great discussion.
Did you say, I think I misheard you, did you say that for us to take advantage of communicating with each of those pods up there around the circle, we would need broadband to do that?
No, we would need the fiber network.
Fiber.
That's what I thought.
Oh, sorry.
I thought that was it, but I thought I thought you had said.
I might need to eat one of these pieces
Well,
of candy at
broadband,
lunchtime. I'm sorry.
yeah, the broadband is, we can communicate with those
Now,
regardless of whether we do broadband.
Yes, let me be clear then. I apologize if I misspoke. All these applications need a fiber network. And so again, I'll use the graphic here. You know, whether again, it's the thought that you need to see the load on a solar system, or whether it's the need to understand what EV load you're pulling on, or whether it's these smart switches, they need that fiber. Broadband just becomes another application on that same network. Thank you for being sure that we clarified that. Because honestly, that really is a key point. It's how that relationship between the electric division and a fiber division ultimately kind of live together. Thank you. Great question. Others there? All right. So with that, Mark's going to start stepping into the financials on that double investment of both the enhanced grid modernization and the electric division financials, along with the establishment of what a fiber division would look like.
Okay, well, good afternoon, Commissioners. I am going to be talking about really from the electric division perspective and their long-range 10-year plan, what the cost impact's going to be for the electric division over the next 10 years, or over the 10 years after it would start, and then also how it would be funded. So we'll talk about the individual cost components. But to go right at the total price tag that we are projecting over 10 years for the electric division is $702 million. So it is, a pretty heavy lift for the electric division. As you might expect, the largest portion of that investment is capital. And the largest portion of that is the build-out of the 5,000-mile fiber network system. Capital cost will represent just under 2/3 of the total $700 million cost to the electric division. The capital budget also includes, as Jamie mentioned, several of those new technologies. Some we're going to pilot. One of the biggest ones, though, is the full deployment of the FLISR devices, which will significantly improve electric reliability over time. That's a component of the capital budget as well. And we'll talk about each cost component here in just a minute. I also want to make you aware that the electric division will be providing what we call sort of an upfront loan, interdivisional loan to the newly formed fiber division. We're projecting that to be $35 million, probably $20 million in the first year, $15 million in the second year. That would be an interest-bearing loan, and it would need to be approved by TVA since it is use of electric proceeds to go to another division. We've already broached the subject with TVA. They're used to that, so we don't anticipate that's going to be any problem at all. And we also are projecting that the fiber division would pay the loan back prior to the end of the 10-year period. And then just probably goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. You got a startup division in fiber. Obviously, it's going to take a few years for sales revenues to exceed operating expenses. So this loan from the electric division will help fund those operations for the first few years before it can become self-sustaining. And then finally, a key point is much like we have done with our Century 2 programs, much like we did with our PACE 10 program to fund the really significant investments in the wastewater system, we will be undertaking a balanced funding approach for this $700 million investment, which will be using debt capacity for the electric division. We'll be having some modest rate increases that we'll talk about in a few moments that will help fund a portion of this as well. Another key point is the fiber division will be paying the electric division for the use of the assets. And that's a rather significant funding component over the 10 years and even obviously well beyond that. And we'll talk about that in just a few moments as well. And then I also want to mention, I say other sources on the bullet, but are very interested. We will be actively looking for grant funding opportunities. That's going to potentially be an important part of this. You may recall 2 or 3 weeks ago, Governor Lee mentioned $200 million in broadband funding. Most of that will probably be for rural build-out, but we have some rural areas that we'll be expanding into. And so we will be applying for grants, and then we'll have our eyes open, our ears open about potential federal grants. And you all may recall Chattanooga back in 2009 received a $110 million grant from the DOE that really accelerated their build out of their fiber system. And as we talk about the funding here in a few moments, you get something like that that is a game changer as far as the funding mix. So we would certainly welcome that. But I just want to let you know we would be pursuing that earnestly.
Hey, Mark, so,
Yes, sir.
so the electric division will own the assets, so fiber will never own its own assets?
Fiber will own a portion of the assets. They'll have some capital on their books, mostly the electronics, but the electric division will own and operate the fiber network. Yes, sir. Correct. So let's just spend a minute and look at the individual cost components, sort of broad categories. There's a lot of detail for most of those line items, but keep it high level. Capital, $442 million, again, 63% of the total $700 million cost. Again, $355 million of that 442 is the build out of that 5,000-mile fiber network. That is the big price tag. We have $80 million in for the distribution automation technologies, again, that Jamie mentioned a few minutes ago. That includes the system-wide deployment of FLISR, and then also the various pilots we're going to do, such as volt-VAR, conservation voltage, demand response for our customers as the system gets built out. O&M, $67 million. It does take cost and labor to operate the fiber network and to maintain it. We anticipate we will hire 58 new KUB employees over the course of the next 10 years, probably as we continue to build out the system. That's going to be the majority of those costs, but there's also material cost built into that as well. Interest. We are and what goes with that, we'll see on the next slide, is debt. We are going to be, anticipate issuance of $287 million in new electric bonds over the first 7 years. And so that has an interest cost associated with it, obviously. And what we're projecting that to be is $83 million over the 10-year period. Yes, sir.
That strikes me as a very high interest based on what we've been getting bonds for lately. Is that just we're kind of worst case scenario, or how are we?
Well, typically, Commissioner, in all of our financial models, we tend to be a little bit conservative, and also remember that we're going out over an extended period of time. So I wouldn't want to use current interest rates and run that across a 10-year plan, because we would probably be sorry we did that one day. So it does have an interest rate spread of 3.5% to 5% that goes up stair step over time. That is conservative based upon where we are today, but that's okay. We usually come in under those interest rate projections, but that's just increases some flexibility to the plan. But good question.
Question.
Yes, sir.
On our capital expense, have we, kind of like the bond ratings, the bond interest you were just talking about, have we built in a potential increase in
Yes.
material labor increases that we all know are going to happen? What is that that's been built into those capital costs?
There are contingencies built into that. I don't know the percentage off the top of my head. We can get that for you, but there are contingency dollars built into that capital, $442 million.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Mark, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
The interest on the bonds,
Mm-hmm.
we couldn't go ahead and do a bond issue that would be prospective. Am I right that we have to spend those bond dollars within a
Yes.
certain period of time of the issue?
Yes, there are U.S. Treasury rules, and basically to guard against arbitrage, that you have to have a spin down. There are spin down requirements that we have to certify to when we do a bond issue. And typically, it all has to be done in 18 months to 2 years on that. When we size our bond issue, we're looking pretty much at that year, and then we'll come back to the market and come back to the market. Some of these issues, as you can imagine, $287 million over 7 years, are going to be somewhat sizable, in particular on the front end. And plus, that's not the only debt we're issuing for the electric division. We have Century 2 that goes alongside this. That debt will help fund those programs as well. And we'll show a debt forecast here in just a moment. Another cost component is in lieu of tax payments. Since this is capital intensive, as we continue to add assets to our electric system, in lieu of tax payments to the city of Knoxville, to Knox County, and even to some of the outlying taxing jurisdictions eventually are going to go up. That's $46 million in cost over that 10-year period. And then I put the loan to the fiber division up there because that is an outflow of cash from electric in those early years, though they're going to get it back with interest as time goes on, but that shows as well as $35 million. And then cash reserves. As you know, we have contingency cash reserves for all of our utility systems. For electric, it's 60 days of operating expenses, and we have some on top of that, what we call rainy day reserves. But as our expenses go up, as you layer in that $700 million, or in particular the capital side of it, your requirements for cash reserves are going to go up as well. So that's about $25 million. So that's sort of a tally sheet on the $702 million.
Mark, with regard to the tax equivalents,
Yes, ma'am.
you have all of these carrots that are given to various projects coming to Knoxville, where their taxes are forgiven for a period of time.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there a possibility that something like that could take place for our fiber expansion?
I think that there is. We have had some preliminary conversations with the city and county administration about the increase in the pilots and potential use for that. So those are very preliminary conversations. There could be multiple uses. Ultimately, that'll be, as you know, under the purview of the City Council and Knox County Commission. But as we've talked to our elected officials about those incremental pilots, they have all been very receptive to, different potential uses for those. Helping out our customers and with affordability being one of those as well. So a lot more to come on that. And I'm actively talking with Susan Janot at the city and Chris Caldwell at the county about that.
And I'll add that we're required to make those payments. We cannot choose not to pay it
Right.
or ask for forgiveness. So it has to go to those jurisdictions first. That's something I learned through this whole process too.
But it
Yes,
would be
correct.
awfully good if, it's still, even if we have a really affordable broadband program, if people can't afford it, then they have access, but it's meaningless access. So these kinds of programs might be a good use for some of them.
Yeah, and Chattanooga, as you all may be aware, Chattanooga has rolled out a program over the past year they call Ed Connect, which you have a combination of private and public funding sources to help low-income households afford internet service. And it has been successful.
And that's what I was going to talk about. I don't know if you're going to go deeper into finances, but
I
also as
am.
we think you are. Oh, I'm so excited.
Yeah. Hey, I've just started.
Call me when you're
Yeah,
done.
Jamie said he gets excited about distribution automation. This excites me. It's hard to sleep at night thinking about getting to talk about this.
Couple things I thought about as we really build out the fiber division. I think there's some opportunities to also think about how we can support communities. And so a couple things that ran across my mind is to think about intentionality around job training. So this will be an opportunity to go into some, as I think about what's happening in portions of our community, particularly in East Knoxville. I think it might be an opportunity for us to work with educational institutions to do some training.
Sure.
So that as we build out this fiber division, as we think about all the capital, we are going to be expending a whole lot of money. And so I would want us to, number one, think about opportunities for as we hire those 58, I think you said 58 new people, is to think about how we can either ramping up what we do with Austin East, what's the program called now?
Teamwork?
Teamwork,
Yep.
or thinking about how we can connect with other
Sure.
organizations to provide opportunities for employment. I know TCAT and other organizations like that will be on board with helping us.
Yep.
The other thing I think about it is we're gonna be spending a whole lot of money on, in terms of construction. And so I know that state law says we can't do quote-unquote set-asides, but I think as an organization, we can absolutely think about goals. And so as we think about women and minority-owned businesses, we're gonna be expending, you know, almost half a billion dollars. And so how do we then think about getting women, minority-owned businesses, underutilized business enterprises into the fold? And so as we
Yeah.
build out and think out, let's make sure that we don't forget
Oh.
about doing those kinds of things. And I'd be willing to work with and help
Yeah.
us figure out what that might look like.
Well, I will go ahead and say, first of all, I agree with everything you said. That's exactly what we're looking towards. We already have a great relationship with TCAT. They already help us on some programs. We just recently heard about a partnership with Knox College, TCAT, and UT to grow this area.
I heard about that, too.
Yeah, I thought you did. Daisha Lundy actually made us aware of it when we met with her. And so that was extremely exciting. She asked a lot of questions about how we could partner going forward. So I think we've got that started, even though we haven't started anything yet. That relationship has already begun. So I think it's a phenomenal idea to grow those folks inside of our company and have opportunities for folks that would maybe even never knew this existed, our utility existed. So that's first and foremost. And then procurement of facilities and contractors and materials, yes. We are constantly looking to diversify our suppliers, and this will just echo that, and we'd love to have your help on that. So
Sure, yeah, all good points. As you know, we have a very active MBE, WBE, SBE program, so undertaking this type of construction capital investment, we will certainly be using that to look for opportunities in that way. Yeah, no question. Okay, so how would we pay for this? Mentioned a balanced funding approach, and hopefully that'll be demonstrated here. A little over 40% is going to be paid through debt. $287 million in bonds sold over the first 7 years. And of course, it says $284 million there because you have issuance cost, and we've deducted $3 million for that. Rates, about $200 million in additional electric system revenue from some rate increases that would be on the front end of our long-range plan. We'll talk about that more specifically here in just a moment. But that'll fund just under 30% of the capital build-out of the $700 million cost. Fiber access revenue. I think I mentioned a few minutes ago, the fiber division will be paying electric division for the use of the network system and some other electric system assets. There's a couple of different fees that we'll reference called system access fees, system utilization fees. We have a methodology to determine what that is, but the more and more fiber customers that are added, really the higher that goes over time. We are projecting $176 million in payments from fiber to electric over the course of the first 10 years. So you can see that's a sizable funding component. And then you got the loan repayment, that's $35 million, and then you have the interest on the loan. The interest rate will be 3.6%. Again, that may be somewhat conservative as we sit here today. We used our weighted average of the bond rates that we have for the first 2 years to come up with that amount. So that's how it would be funded. Let's look a little closer at the debt. I've mentioned $287 million a couple of times. Like we've been doing with our electric long-term bonds since we started Century 2, they would be amortized over a 30-year period, so a 30-year payback on that. They probably have 8 to 10-year call provisions like we typically do, which you can refinance, of course. And then it's very important that we would maintain our target debt indicators, and we'll look at that here. This shows our electric debt forecast, and so you can see on the left-hand chart with the green shaded, that is the electric bonds. Those 7 years make up the $287 million right here. You can see it's a little higher on the front end, then it begins to average out about $35 million per year. So that's 287. The next column shows the bonds for the other electric investments. This is Century 2, and that would total for all 10 years $145 million. So in total, our electric long-range plan anticipates $432 million in additional debt funding, $287 for enhanced grid mod, $145 for Century 2. Obviously, things will change, as you well know, as years go by and adjustments will be made depending upon the current environment. But that's where we see it at this point in time. So how does that change our total outstanding debt picture for electric? Though the number doesn't show up there today, we have $294 million in outstanding electric bonds, 294. You add $432 million to that. We're also going to scheduled repayments of debt is $210 million. I know these are a lot of numbers, but you'll end up at $516 million at the end of the 10 years. There's a high mark of $576 million about in year 7. Another thing you can note, though, once you get past year 7, only $9 million in those last 3 years, and there's in part a reason for that we'll come back to again in just a moment. Our system debt ratio, which is important, we want to keep that below 50% or so. That's sort of our ceiling. It's going to stabilize and be in the mid-40s for most of the plan and then begin to decline below 40%. And then the final column is our debt service coverage. And we talk a lot about that, but basically that is a key indicator of the financial health of the electric division. It shows how many times for a given year's net revenue, take operating revenue, take out some expenses, what's available to service debt, how many times does that cover your maximum debt service over the life of the bonds? Obviously, the higher, the better. Our target is 3.0. We feel we need to consistently achieve that to maintain our high-quality AA or higher bond ratings with S&P and Moody's. And you can see that we are projected to do that. So as we go along, situations will change. Interest rates may change, but that indicator in particular is something we'll keep mindful on. We're not going to let that go below 3.0. We will have to make adjustments, and that's just something that's sort of a day in the life of me and my staff, constantly monitoring that year to year and seeing if we need to make adjustments in our investments.
So that 3.0 is directly correlates to the debt ratio, correct?
Not necessarily. There can be some correlation there. The debt ratio measures how much of the electric system assets are funded by debt. Okay?
Remember, you used to show us a chart that looked at all 4 utilities, and there was a debt ratio that we needed to be at in order to.
Yeah, and that's what I said for electric. Each has sort of their own target range. For electric, we like to not go above 50%. So gas, it's quite a bit different. Wastewater, we've been up in the low 60s. We've committed to the board to get that below 50% by 2027. We're on track to do that. Water, we also want to keep a little below 50% and moving closer to 40%. Before, if we weren't talking about enhanced grid mod and you say, well, we're not doing that, take that away, then probably our debt ratio target would be adjusted somewhat downward. Yeah. Okay.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Is the 287 million in bonds, is that sort of our high water mark for what we can borrow for this project and stay above the 3.0?
You might be able to do a little more than that. Again, Commissioner, it's part of just a balanced funding approach. It wouldn't be too much more than that, I would say. You want to keep some flexibility, obviously, for things that might modify. But if we don't change any of the revenues at all and you add more debt to there, then those debt ratios begin to drop and drop and drop. So for example, just as an extreme example, we said, well, what if we didn't have rate increases that we'll talk about here in a moment? Or what if we just had 1% rate increases and we issue debt instead? Those plummet well below the 3.0 level and simply just is not sustainable on that. But
for those who might be watching, I want to make sure my assumptions are correct. It is not only not affordable for us to do this without issuing debt, it's also not really fair because these assets are going to be used for a long period of time. And so the people who are going to use them down the road also need to have some skin in the game, as opposed to the people who happen to be living in today when we're going to start doing this. So that spreads the cost out over the users, over at least 30 years worth of users.
That's an excellent point, and that really is sort of one of the tenets of our financial approach, our funding approach to all of our systems, that in particular for these long-term infrastructure programs, you're just dead on, that, you know, these assets, some last maybe up to 100 years or so, and that helps you spread the cost. It's just part of that balanced funding approach. You're not going to be able to say, well, let's do 100% of it debt. That ain't going to happen. But to do 100% of it in rates, really? Well, one, your rates aren't going to be affordable. And then, you know, I guess our philosophy is you want to spread those costs over. And that's where you just have to constantly manage your debt levels and where you're going with it. So.
Just one more
Yes.
thing. The other thing that would be true here is that as we're looking at that, as we start to do the build-out and bring on customers, we're talking about a 35% take rate.
Correct.
So if that goes higher, then our debt coverage is going to be better than this at that point.
It would be somewhat better because the payments coming from the fiber division to the electric division would be higher. That is correct, yes. But also, the flip side of that is that the capital cost of the electric division are also going to be a little bit higher if you have a higher take rate. There is another side to that. Yes.
And operating costs are likely to be higher too, so I understand we're not
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah.
the whole
Can't do it in a vacuum.
gain in the take
Right.
rate, but we would gain something.
And, you know, if you're asking the question of, well, what if you're, you know, a decent amount below that 35% take rate? Well, the converse is true.
Right.
The capital investment by the electric division goes down. The debt issues are going to go down somewhat too. The interest cost is going to go down somewhat too. As Jamie mentioned well, there's this symbiotic relationship between the two. There's a lot of variables that would adjust. Yeah.
And as we expand to the home, those applications as well too, is that balance as well too, because electric's going to continue to press that fiber deeper into the network, almost even agnostic of what happens with the fiber division as well. As we prove out those technologies, again, we very well may be talking about a full deployment of fiber deeper than we would have otherwise, as those technologies prove out beneficial to the utility systems as well.
Okay, another significant funding component is electric system revenue. And our electric long-range plan, in order to fund the $700 million cost, we are looking at 3% rate increases the first 3 years of the program. I do want to mention that probably, I think I'll be specific here, about 58% of the revenue that would be generated from those 3% rate increases over the 10 years will go to fund enhanced grid modernization, a share of the $700 million.
How much was that again?
58%.
Half of it will go.
A little over half, slightly more than half would go. So where does the other 42% go? That goes to fund Century 2 and other electric system cost. You may recall that in our long-range plan, even if you remove the $700 million out of there, we still had some modest rate increases throughout the center of that plan, 1% actually. So that would still need to happen even if we took this off the table. So if you're looking really at that delta over that period of time, you're looking at that 58%. And if you're looking at really what that percentage will be, it's a little over 5% over the 10-year period. We'll talk about that here in just a second.
But the key, go ahead.
Sorry. So we have 1% increases already planned, and then we're going to add.
No. This replaces that.
Okay, it replaces it. And
This replaces that.
And what does 3% look like?
I'll show
on
you
an
here in
average?
just
Okay.
a second. Yeah, it's next chart up.
Just a reiteration though, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I have to remind myself. All that's for the electric grid. Doesn't matter whether we're doing broadband or not. This is a grid modernization program.
This is for helping to fund the fiber network. Yes,
Yes.
the fiber build-out. That enables broadband.
Right.
Yes, correct. Okay, and then last point on here, as far as the rate increases, any electric rate increase would be applied solely to the usage or commodity, KWH rate for residential customers. You'll recall that the board took action last summer to freeze the level of residential basic service charges, not just for electric, but for all services through December of 2025. Okay, so let's look at the impacts. Two tables here, Commissioners. The table at the top shows what our electric rate forecast or rate increase forecast is, including enhanced grid modernization, including the $700 million in the long-range electric plan. Those are those 3% that you see right there. The impact on the average residential electric customer would be around $3.50 on the monthly bill. So in total, if we swing over here to the right, that's a little over $10. The average residential bill, which has been relatively stable for the last 4 to 5 years, is about $115, $116 on that. That's where we came up with the $3.50 amounts. Obviously, if you use a lot more electric power, since it's going to usage rate, it's going to be more. If you use quite a bit less than the average, which is 1,100 kilowatt hours, it's going to be less. Other thing to note about that top table, after year 3, we're not projecting the need for any electric rate increases for the following 7 years, and probably beyond that as well, be my guess. The second table is what we would be talking to the board about for the electric long-range plan if we took the $700 million out of the equation. We were still looking at those 1%, which add about $1.20 to the average residential bill. So the long-term impact, when I say long-term impact, is the difference between that, and that's your $3.30. If you're looking just in the confines of the 10 years, though, it's more than that. It's more than that 3%. It's that about 5% that I mentioned. If we're just looking within the 10 years, every year that goes by after the 10 years, though, most likely is you would whittle away at that 5%, and it would grow closer to whatever, that 9 minus 6 to 3%. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just don't want to give the illusion that, well, just the net impact is 3%, 330. Oh, it depends upon the time period. If you're looking at this 10-year period, it's going to be more than that.
Question. Help me understand why we can't, on the top grid, why we can't spread the rate increases out over the build-out period.
We looked at that. There is a rationale to do those sooner than otherwise because you're going to lose revenue. If we said, okay, instead of those 3%, let's do 1.5 all the way through 7 or 2% through 7, we looked at all of that. All of those scenarios take revenue out of the plan and add debt to it, and that balance becomes unbalanced. Those debt coverage ratios we looked at a few minutes ago, they get whittled down.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, sir. That's why. We looked at a lot of scenarios for this, and we really landed on that right there.
Good news for all you commissioners who have longer years, you have still a number of, you're going to be heroes back on the backside. You're not going to have any rate increases.
And Mark, that's because the loss of revenue, that's because you don't have the funds to build it out quickly enough to bring on new customers?
Well, but the customers' bills are going up differently. So that's the electric sales revenues are going to drop.
Oh, the sales revenue.
Yes, the
Okay, so
electric
we're not
sales
even
revenues.
talking about
No.
customer, we're only talking about electric
That
revenues.
is correct.
And how
This
quickly
is all
they
the
build.
electric division
Okay,
that we're
okay.
talking about here. Correct.
If there is anything that could derail this, this process is that. So I think it's important for us to communicate, so that people understand what's happening, what the proposals are, long-term and short-term impact.
Yes, sir.
So that when we take the next step in this process, whatever that might be, that folks understand, and this is where, we got to just meet people where they are, and we got to really have conversations and discussions about this is what this means, because people are going to see 3% increases, and and for people who
Sure.
might be already struggling financially, that is that seems as if it's a big hit, right? And so we need to really talk about, that is why we're doing that and how it's going to impact, particularly, we talk about the digital divide and how this is really going to help with, give us opportunity to
Bridge
provide
that
lower cost broadband. And so we really have to be strategic about that and really strategically communicate to folks, to our community, to our customers, what this might mean.
Sure.
This is going to be so critical for us.
Thank you. Just to kind of dovetail off of what he's saying, maybe, and I see at the bottom, you're saying ample notice would be given. Would part of the education be with the commissioners and the county commission and city council members who would also be in a great position to educate their constituents?
Sure. And in our meetings with the local elected officials, we have discussed this.
Yeah.
So it would not be a surprise to them.
Okay.
Now, there'll be further conversations and reminders as we get closer to actually making a formal funding recommendation to the board. But yeah, that's a very good point. Our thought is, it depends upon the actual timing of this. So if we said maybe if everything fell into place, one scenario is potentially bringing a formal funding recommendation to the board in late summer. So if the board was going to be considering these rate increases at that point in time, the effective dates, we're going to move the effective date. So from when the board takes action to when the rates would go into effect, you're looking at least 6 months. So if the board took action in August on first reading, then it's not going into effect until April. So it would be, if that scenario falls out, it'd be April 22, April 23, April 24. So we want to provide some time for that education, for that awareness. What is it? What's in it for me? We believe it's going to be a much more efficient electrical system and much greater reliability for you. And then when Jamie talks about the fiber business plan, you'll see for those who there might be some decent savings if you're going to use us as your provider of broadband services. So.
And I know that some of our fellow organizations in the valley have come up with creative ways to support low-income communities and provide access to those who,
Sure.
Again, as someone who works in education and someone who works in an organization who had to go remote last year, the digital divide is real. It is absolutely real. Particularly a lot of our folks, we always talk about center city, but also in our rural communities, it's real. So whatever we could do as we roll this out to provide, to show the community that we're going to provide support to those who might be,
Sure.
who might be suffering from the digital divide, and what we could do to add some support to them. I think that's going to be really critical, really key. The second thing I think is going to be key is that we continue to invest in our already. I know that we, of course, Tiffany's been a team already to do a whole lot with our support programs, our team and other things. And so I think that we have to continue to let folks know that those will be available.
No question, and just speaking to one of those, home weatherization, we just think is so fundamental to helping address the energy burden for particularly our lower income customers. And so, we have about $2.5 million with TVA's contributions going into that each year, and our own customer contributions, our funding out of our electric system as well, and TVA. So, but still, the waiting list is long. There is a lot to be done, but as I think that is a passion of ours to further that.
Mark, you mentioned something about, what's in it for me. I would really be interested in at some point, a presentation from our marketing team on what that's going to look like and how we'll be involving community leaders in that process. I think if we can make a case of how this improves, a lot of folks are working hourly jobs where they never use the internet for what they need to do. So what's in it for them versus someone who has to go to the office or has to work on their computer all day. But just figuring out what those messages to different constituents are going to be.
Sure.
I think there's a really great opportunity here about making a case on how the entire community will benefit, but it's going to be, it can't be one size fits all. So I guess a presentation would be really helpful in seeing how community organizations and leaders can be part of this as our allies.
Good.
So.
I understand. Okay, thank you.
And, I'm sorry. No, you're fine. I would go so far as to say that in the presentation to the community, these graphics help, and I know that I'm a person who likes to see things in black and white. So, talking about it is great, but when you actually see the breakdown and the difference, and somebody can do the math on it, on the average, that may also help as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sitting here processing this, knowing what we have coming up before us in April and May with regard to budget.
Mhm.
Do we just take electric budget sort of off the charts until we address this issue?
No, we will need to adopt a budget for the electric system, and it will be a budget that will not include enhanced grid modernization. So when we come back, if everything follows through and approvals fall in place, probably in late summer, then we would have an additional budget appropriation for the electric division to add for those costs for FY22. It's the same thing on the bonds as well. We will probably, again, we just have to make this decision, Commissioner, but probably we will wait on the whole bond issue to be approved in late summer. I think the electric division probably has the flexibility to do that, because if you go back to that debt chart, it had 60 million and 20 million, 80 million total. 3/4 of that is for enhanced grid mod. We'll probably just wait on that, as opposed to approving this here and then that there. Because we typically don't actually go to the bond market until mid to late fall. So I think that would probably dovetail nicely, potentially. Okay, last slide I have is just to show to you how those payments from the fiber division to the electric division change over time. And again, those are basically payments that are made. We do calculations. We're looking at what's the proportion of the cost of the investments the electric division made that the fiber is benefiting from, and there's calculations for that. And you can see over time, as that, it was based upon a 35% take rate, as we discussed, but the more and more fiber customers you add over time, Jamie, I don't want to hit you with this, you can see that it gets up, and it begins to level out close to about $29 million per year. So if you add all those bars together, that adds the $176 million that I mentioned on the front end. But the point I want to make is you can see from the title of the slide that the more and more that grows, the better the chance of this happening, and then even if you go beyond on the rate increases, and then the better chance you don't need as much debt for the electric division. And obviously the fiber division needs to stay financially sufficient as well, and we take all that into consideration, of course. But, case in point of how this has actually played out, we again look to our friends to the south in Chattanooga. It's been a long time since they've had an electric rate increase. And there's been, meetings that Gabe and Mike and I have gone to over the years, and we talk about rates and talk to EPB about it, and they say, we don't have any rate increase, no rate increase. Well, why don't you ever raise rates? Fiber. That's a really one-word answer. So they're an actual demonstration of that symbiotic relationship and how it really can be a win-win for both divisions and all our customers.
It's because the fiber division is paying the electric division for using its fiber.
That is correct.
Okay. It's very similar to the way Comcast and others, if they string on our poles, they have to pay rent for it.
That is a portion of it, yes, sir. That's correct. Okay, that concludes my comments. I'm going to turn it back over to, let me get you. Sorry.
It's all right. Now, we'll step in this phase of the program, and you all are really starting to hit on a lot about the broadband offering, and this portion of our discussion today is really centered around the business plan leading up to your consideration of the resolution that's before you today. So Mark is still available for financial questions, but we will be switching over to talk more a little bit about broadband and that specific product offering there. Before we jump in there, I want to recognize just 2 or 3 folks that have really been essential to developing our plans. They're sitting up here behind us. Michelle Wilson, our manager of new products, Andrew Himaleski, our manager of communication infrastructure, and Jay Miller, our team lead in our communications group, have been very central to helping develop these plans along with Mark and I and all the rest of senior staff. And so they very well may chime in with other answers today as we go into this particular discussion. But we also had some help as well too. Again, we mentioned our friends to the south at Chattanooga. They've been very essential in helping us understand what this landscape looks like. They actually have a consulting division called EP Broadband Solutions. We've engaged with them and they've helped us in a number of different ways on the technical side. West Monroe Partners is a national firm that has worked with us for years. They actually helped us develop our first smart grid roadmap, if you will, and ultimately helped us be able to get stimulus funding back in again, those Obama administration stimulus days. Wilkins Group is a marketing firm out of Chattanooga. They've helped us both with the purchase intent survey along with other some marketing efforts as well. On the legal side of the house, of course, our in-house or outside counsel, but our own, Bill Coley and his staff have helped alongside with a firm down in Chattanooga, Miller Martin, with Mark Smith, well known throughout the valley, working with a number of distributors, but specifically in this space too, had some experience working, advancing broadband plans as well. And then with everything financial, obviously we engaged Bass, Berry & Sims and Mr. Mark Mamontoff. Now, after we had developed these plans, we engaged Kersey Consulting. He is a local proprietor of Broadband Consultation, former employee with Jackson Energy who helped stand up their system. And so after we were done, we asked him to just take a look kind of externally to just give a good view of what he felt in our plans, and he was able to visit with us and share his opinions and felt very strongly that we had met the necessary elements and that was a good plan in that particular case as well. So just wanted to kind of let you know who all has helped us with the plans that are before you. So major sections inside the business plan. One, product offerings. Our base residential internet package will be a gigabyte standard. We wanted to establish a product that we felt really positioned Knoxville and our consumers with a cutting edge, high quality package, really building upon what future needs will be, not necessarily looking in the rear view. It will also offer the typical triple play that we see across the nation, both TV and phone as well. Those are starting to kind of evolve with streaming technologies and folks cutting the cord at home with their phone. But one of the key differences that maybe some early adopters in this field is we will be having a branded streaming product. And so if you come to KUB as a customer, if you want to stream, that's great. If you want to use our service, that's great as well too. And we'll offer that. And you'll see inside the business case, there's tiers like you would expect to see from a person offering this in a retail side. Along with the same, with a rebranded phone product, there'll be IP, voice over IP product. It would just be a resale of that particular product as well. We would not become a phone exchange, which is a whole different level set of headaches that go along with that, but we will not be doing that. We will also serve our business community in this particular space as well too. And so part of the business plan does include those business products. Again, as you'll notice inside of those plans, they're at a different cost, a different expectation of service, and thus the difference in that particular regard there, but those start at a gigabyte as well. So any questions on the products that you all have seen as you've reviewed the plans there? Great. So there's a discussion that's required inside of the business plans to talk about the competitive environment. Inside of that section, we lay out what the competition is like in our service territory. We lay out what their prices are and compare that to our prospective product price. We also discuss those elements that as we've talked to our consumers and we've done the research through our purchase intent survey of talking about what they expect of a broadband provider. It's hard to believe that literally 365 days ago today is when the world kind of changed in that particular regard. And so it's interesting to be sitting here talking to you all now about the points that many of you all made about working from home and remote learning, that we're talking about a potential offering for broadband for Knoxville. I think the discussion, in the area or regionally or even nationally was broadband becoming a utility? And in that particular regard, I think our customers have indeed said that they require broadband for just more than entertainment. And as such, We think that the needs for that have definitely risen in the last year in that particular regard.
Hey, Jamie, in the,
Yeah.
in the survey, is there any question about what you anticipate or would like to pay, or what would be?
It was more so from the aspect, and it's the bullet there on the slide, to say if KUB were to offer a similar service of your current provider, trying to establish where there'd be inertia for us to be able to gain that market share. It was more so if offered similar product at similar price, basically, how do you feel about KUB and would you move? And over 50% of the respondees in the survey said that they would indeed consider or would move to KUB if a similar product was offered. When asked, would you like for KUB to be in the business, is the other point. That was almost 80% of respondees in the deal said that they would like for KUB to be offering a broadband product. And I really think that speaks to choice predominantly. Many of us in our area where we live, we only have one provider in our particular area. 60%, matter of fact, of our service territory has only one choice of a provider at their particular location. Now, there are multiple providers across our service territory, but basically where most of us live inside of the KUB service territory, there's only one choice where you live, so to speak.
And right now, our proposal is to offer a better product at a lower price, right?
You're setting me up for my next slide.
Okay.
That's right.
We're working together.
Good job.
We're working together.
That's an extra piece of candy over there for you now. So
I'll take Gabe.
That's right. Take Gabe's. Take
I'm
Gabe's.
wanting this
That's
one.
right. That's right. We do highlight how we do feel we would be competitive in the marketplace with our product. Thank you. And laying that out, it's really the notion of what type of quality of the product do you have compared to competitors, and then ultimately, and I think it really speaks to some of the things you've all brought up, is that we view it as a total package. You know, obviously there's electric side, utility benefits, and us utility folks get really kind of geeked out about that, but at the end of the day, we are talking about broadband, so we acknowledge that. So if we look at it from just a what's in it for me perspective, as some of you all have raised, indeed, you would take a look, and one of the key things we would point out, what I've got on the screen are basically the packages that we have lifted off of their webpage that each of us could get if you were to be a Comcast customer. I've used Xfinity, Comcast there because they are the predominant provider here in Knoxville. You'll see their plans there that we've laid out in the first three columns will be their 25 megabyte, 100 megabyte, and then their 1,000 megabyte or a 1 gigabyte plan in that particular regard. You'll notice the download speeds are not equivalent to the upload speed. A key distinguishing fact that we've talked about municipal broadband is symmetrical speed. And as you all have talked about virtual learning, telehealth, working from home, that upload speed has become much more meaningful. It's really become an issue when you see that glitch or frozen video or you miss that sound bite in a business meeting. It's meaningful. I used to, if that was just for streaming and watching a TV show, you could hit rewind and see what's going on again. But when it's in a business setting, an educational setting, that becomes that much more meaningful in that particular regard. So you will notice that our product would be symmetrical in that nature, and thus be at least from my perspective, a better quality product in that regard. And then for how much you can use at what you would consider that base fee. Most folks in the competitive space right now put a cap on that. You can only use, in the case of Comcast, 1.2 terabytes. As we've talked before, that seems like a lot of data, but with virtual learning, working from home, a whole lot of Netflix, a little bit of Xbox perhaps, that terabyte will get gone really quick. And if you need to use more than that, then you've got to pay extra in that regard. Again, a distinguishing factor of municipal broadband, it's unlimited. There's really no cap on how much you could use, really setting folks up for an ultimate experience at a very high speed and an unlimited perspective. And then as you'd say, well, what's in it for me from a wallet perspective? Again, just using prospective pricing of what is out there today, non-promotional. The $65 is what we have kind of used inside of the business plan for our particular product. And you can compare that with what Comcast is charging in the non-promotional full retail market, at least today. And that you can see where that $65 would slot you in their product set as it relates to a competitive perspective or quality of the product perspective. And thus why we think that we would make the case that we would think we can obtain at least that 35% market share in our market. So,
you know, Jamie, if anybody has ever called Comcast customer service, you know the disaster that is. You know, if we were able to guarantee customers a local customer service option, I would pay
extra not to have to talk to someone in Malaysia about Knoxville, Tennessee?
Well, it really is part of the value proposition of municipal broadband. You know, we've talked about how state law governs where you can operate, and those are each local solutions. And so, Commissioner Small, you're talking about local dollars, you know, needing to stay in the area with local jobs. You're talking about customer service being really tailored for what we are here in our area. We talk about that relationship between electric and broadband. I mean, it really is set up. I mean, the state legislature picked electric utilities to be in this space for a reason. It really is in our wheelhouse. We have the electric, we have the infrastructure. We have now proven out in the last decade that there are applications that make sense for utilities to invest in. We're good at customer service most of the time. Tiffany's staff's awesome. But at the end of the day, this is what we do, is we take care of our folks in town. And so it's local solutions derived by folks that we're all familiar with. It's amazing to me how many people we've heard in our research and we understand from our peers like EPB that say one of the best benefits of municipal broadband is they understand their bill. They understand what they're paying and what their speeds are, and it's transparent and it's simple. So I don't want to besmirch any folks in our community that are working hard doing business for the Comcast, Xfinity, AT&T folks and so forth, so on. But I would submit to you, I think there are some things that we can do a little bit better in that space. So if somebody takes broadband, there could be some potential savings. Well, yes, Commissioner Ward, I'm sorry.
I was just looking at our chart here showing the speeds and where we would jump in. And I noticed that, you know, those speeds today compared to 5 years ago or 10 years ago are dramatically different. That 1 gig wasn't even an option for download. So I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but I guess in a way with a 7-year build out, are we implying that they're not going to keep upgrading their systems to
It's hard to, I think that many are. I think that there are financial restrictions that may point to facts that they wouldn't be able to provide that. But I can't speculate as to what they may or may not do. You're seeing some fiber to home, but not nationally much at all in that particular regard. You know, there's a lot of investment in 5G and things like that, but that requires fiber to really enable that network as well too. What's nice about fiber to home and the electronics we're using is almost unlimited. Also part of this package as well is a 2.5 gig plan. So if they want that from KUB, if somebody wants to have that, knock them out. I remember first time when EPB offered a gig, it was $600 is what it cost on a residential level. Now EPB offers that same gig for $68. What I know about EPB is they're upgrading their electronics and they'll get even faster. And so they're jealous that we're going to be a little faster right out the gate. But at the end of the day, they're going to keep investing in their system as well too. But I think it's reasonable to understand that competition provides that opportunity for upgrade. But what I know they haven't done is they haven't done that in the Knoxville community yet. And so the free market's kind of stalled out, it feels like to me, and they've not gotten to those areas that are underserved. And then in some cases that we see that the speeds aren't available for folks that they need. But I think it is a good point that I would assume they would indeed in some cases. And I think what we saw in Chattanooga with competition was too, I forgot to mention that, was indeed they moved up on the scale of when they got new stuff from the competitors. You know, competition in theory is good for Knoxville. Competition was good for Chattanooga as well too, in that particular regard. So, great discussion. Good points. Anything else on the product set or anything else around that? Great. So as we look at the fiber division itself, it would be a 5th division to KUB. It'd be financially independent, self-sustaining. Get a little help from the electric division to get started, but ultimately has to pay its fair share. We believe we've set up a business plan and financial models that cause that exact thing to happen. Good news is we've got a little bit of experience in that. You all kind of asked that question. We've been running 4 separate utility divisions for a few years now. We're good at kind of keeping things straight in that regard, and so inside this plan lays out exactly how that would work. We think at its peak we would add about 200 additional KUB staff. Again, if you were thinking about a new company coming to Knoxville, that's a good opportunity for job growth. We are excited about those partnerships. When we hear about those things, these will be good KUB jobs in our local community. We're excited about those opportunities to partner with folks trying to get folks good jobs in that regard. I won't say we're full on our campus, but inside these plans does allow for expenses for at least new facilities, and we'll look for opportunities to either build new building or rehab existing buildings in our community for those efforts. And then something a little unique to KUB is marketing and sales support staff. It's great that we've got Jay on our staff. He has a background in marketing and sales, and he's really been a great help in that regard, but obviously we'll need to grow that expertise and understand how to compete in a competitive market selling this product in that particular regard.
My question would be on, not so much on the sales and support side, but how we did hire, I know there's a manager in here, but I saw it was under marketing and sales. Will we have a chief fiber? Once we get it rolling, someone who, because if you think about our different utilities, managing gas and managing electric division and managing wastewater and water is totally different than managing a fiber division. And so we will probably need to bring in some expertise at that level to help us stay on, because we could easily, if we don't continue to upgrade our facility, our services, we don't continue to upgrade.
Right. And the good news is we've got some experience in fiber. Remember that 150 miles they were talking about. Andrew's the manager of that particular group. We have 2 fiber engineers already from AT&T that manage that network today. We have now 4 fiber splicers, again, with years of experience. And so we've been growing that experience as well too. And I think it's outside of those technical areas that we'll continue to grow that expertise as well too. But yes, it is definitely a new business, and we learn experience every day. Some of our acquisitions have come from other companies who are in even the municipal space in a competitive environment. And so we've been gaining a little bit of experience just with their fiber knowledge, even though we're not in the business, because we knew that we wanted somebody who had some experience in that regard. But yeah.
So my answer to that is yes. I think we talked about, I want to grow some folks in Knoxville, but also want to bring some folks on that have that experience, because you got to have both, because I think so. So it'll be a separate, since it's so unique, it'll be a separate division of the company, and we'll have to have a lot of attention that way, but it'll be a combination of getting those who have been doing it for years, and then we want to grow our own staff throughout the whole process. So the answer is yes, we'll do a lot of those things.
Other questions on that? Great question. All right, if we look at from just a fiber division, also part of the business plan that you're taking a look at today and considering, it does obviously have a very detailed set of financials in that particular regard. If we look at the financial highlights of that fiber division, it includes $600 million in O&M over the 10 years. The bulk of that goes back to that $176 million that Mark referenced early in payment for access fees and utilization of the electric infrastructure, as well as the cost of goods sold, if you will, access to the internet and those television packages and so forth and so on. Everything else is just as you would expect: staffing, taxes, all those fun things that the division would have to pay in that particular regard. It would fund $39 million in capital over 10 years, again, whether that be facilities, fleet, things like that you would expect of an infrastructure of a company, along with some electronics that would enable the broadband itself. And obviously, as Mark mentioned, this division over time would be funded by its own revenues, and on the front end, that $35 million loan from the electric division. On that revenue side, you've heard us say it a lot. There are varying degrees of take rates that we can talk about. That research, we've shared a little bit with you all over the course of conversations. Chattanooga right now maintains about a 70% market share in their community, but at the same point in time, many of our peers are hitting about that 50% take rate in their communities, both those that have been built out for a while and those that are currently being built out. We went with a conservative number, but a meaningful number inside the plan with 35% take rate. We think that's very achievable. We hope we can achieve more than that as we get out into the competitive market space. From a pure break-even perspective, as it relates to the business plan, we start generating net cash, positive net cash, I'd say, being in the black, so to speak, but at the beginning of year 8 of the 10-year plan there with this division. So, questions on the finances? So as we kind of shift a little bit of gears, and kind of before your consideration of the resolution today, we just kind of want to let you know a little bit about how our conversations in the community have been going. I think it was great that many of you all talked about, we need to be sure we're talking to folks, and I would submit to you that what we've been visiting with them is this total value proposition. I know that broadband is what really gets the headline here, but there really is a strong connection and a really great benefit to our electric division. And without that, it frankly doesn't work. As many of you pointed out, we would be investing in many of these technologies and coming with a different financial plan. But again, it's the marrying of that broadband that really provides a great community investment in that regard. And because of that, I think folks see that, the people that we've talked to. We've talked to every city council representative, every county commissioner, and both of our mayors. They understand the plan and they support it, and has been received very well. Once word starts leaking out a little bit, whether through the purchase intent survey or articles or meeting with our advisory panel, we've had some unsolicited, I'll call it, customer input as well too. It has been 100% positive, and I'll give you a great example of that here in just a second. And when we met with our newly minted customer advisory panel, one of the things we said basically was, what do you all want to talk about? And the first thing they wanted to talk about was broadband. And so we moved that up on the list, and again, feedback from that group was outstanding as well. And I want to share with you just a couple snippets here, and you can kind of read on the screen here the feedback. This is one of those unsolicited feedback from a customer in Luttrell. Somebody in here mentioned our rural customers and that digital divide in this regard. And I want you to kind of just take a look at this. This was a family. Again, both parents are in school right now, but they have young children there in school as well. The only internet we have is our mobile hotspots on our cell phones. Our whole community is struggling, and we need your help. We've talked to everybody, service providers, our local government officials, but this service seems to, talking about KUB service, this service seems to be our last hope. I know this is not something you do tomorrow, but you'll have customers to help you pay for your financial decisions. And it was that theme that we continue to receive both inside the Beltway of Knoxville and in our rural communities as well. Specifically to our customer advisory panel, when we talk about wanting to be sure that people understand that value proposition between electric and the broadband, again, whether it was business leaders, whether it be our environmental representative, community leaders in there, they all overwhelmingly were supportive of the notion of advancing this broadband plan. As you can see on there, from a business perspective and promoting Knoxville, the minute we get a green light on this, they would want to use this as a selling point for Knoxville. You can see there, in my opinion, this should be an absolute no-brainer. Well, maybe we need to think about it a little bit, but again, the notion is that they're really, even folks say, let's get this and let's get it going because we can see the benefits for our community. From a feedback perspective about the impact to kids and virtual learning right now, again, we've tried to meet that digital divide, and whether it be an affordability aspect or whether it be a connectivity aspect, we acknowledge that that's still there as well too. And then, again, just that acknowledgement that COVID really has changed the game for broadband. You know, at the end of the day, we contend that it was headed there as a utility, almost a way of life in that particular regard. But I think the last sentence there in that last quote really summed up the whole group's opinion. It says, we are very, very strong supporters of where you're going. So again, I would echo that there was unanimous support in that regard. And I kind of want to end where we were talking about there as far as from a comment perspective. You all have really started to tie into it, and I think the folks that we talk about as well. This is a community investment. You know, I'll reiterate that, you know, Gabe has said that, you know, Mayor Kincannon, as part of her platform, asked us to take a look at this. This is a big deal. But at the end of the day, the benefits to the community, as you can see, the quote on here, are much bigger than just the investment in the fiber. This quote is from Dr. Benton Lobo. He is the head of the Department of Finance and Economics at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. EPB commissioned him both pre the deployment of their fiber network and then in the last to take a 10-year look and see about the economic benefits to Chattanooga. And you've heard, I think, me say before that in the 10 years since they've been deployed, it's been a $2.7 billion impact to Chattanooga. We all know the branding and the cutting edge view of what Gig City has done for Chattanooga. In his estimation, it has added 9,500 jobs to the Chattanooga area solely directly related to the broadband. And why is that? Well, again, I'll point you to the underlying portions here. The true economic value is bigger than the dollars that we're talking about today. Ultimately, it has provided Chattanooga with a platform that is necessary for smart grid, running that utility, and at the same point in time provided that platform from an entrepreneurial incubator for cutting edge business, education, and research applications. Companies want to locate to Chattanooga because of the environment that's there because of this broadband. When we talk to business leaders, when we talk to folks that are excited about this, they see this as a real springboard for Knoxville as well too. And so when we talk about, when folks say, well, what's in it for me? It may not be a direct benefit that moment in that broadband service or in that electric investment, but ultimately this notion of what the community investment will mean for all of us in Knoxville in that particular regard. So I will end where we started. You are here. Today is just a first step in this process to get these plans evaluated and see what the regulatory body thinks about our plans and as we continue our community dialogue. There will be at least 2 more formal steps before you. We've talked about those. One, the next step would be to take a next step forward an affirmative vote for it, and we would have a public forum. But then there'd be a final opportunity to visit with this board in which we would make that final decision, ultimately recommending to City Council before a vote. So, happy to answer any questions at this point in time, but I'm going to hand it back over to President. Yes, I'm sorry.
One last question.
Yes.
So when you're talking about the rural customer that you just showed that response, if someone were to ask us, how long is this going to take? So what's the time frame is realistically,
Right.
as far as how, if this goes through, if everything goes as planned, according to the timeline for the formality of it, what are we looking at?
I think that once we get the green light to go, and so let's assume that, like Mark talked about, that if we made the whole cycle and it's this fall, and we're able to start constructing and setting up a business in that particular regard, I think we're 7 years until we get to all the parts of our service territory. We would hope to serve, though, as we go. So in year one, let's say if we pass 20,000 customers, we think we'll take 35% of that market per se. So we would serve as we go. There's obviously going to be somebody that says, well, I'm in year 4, I want to be in year 2, or I want to be in year 7. I think it's very logical, and our thoughts are at this particular point in time, it's a balanced scorecard. We know where we need these utility applications. We know which circuits are underperforming. And so to the extent that lines up with where we are going with our broadband expansion, somebody in a rural area may be sooner as opposed to later. But those lengths of fiber, if you just kind of grew it out from that ring, some of those rural runs are pretty rural and pretty long, and it may be that they're in the later years. And I thought that the insights, I think this is his quote, is I know this is not something you can do tomorrow. I think they've been waiting for so long, just the notion that they would have hope that within the next few years, there's actually an opportunity for growth in that particular area. I think they would view it as a real positive regardless.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to say, I hope that as we roll this out, and I'm going to use the word intentional, and I've used it several times, is that we are intentional about how we roll this out, because I would hate for black and brown communities and poor communities to be the last ones.
No.
So we tell them, you all in year 7, right?
Right.
And so as we think about how to roll this out, to make sure, like you talked about, that it is a balanced scorecard,
Yep.
so that communities who need it the most, right, are the
Yep.
ones who are getting it the last, right?
Exactly.
And so I would hope that we are very intentional about how we do that.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. We got to
Absolutely.
get to those folks who do not have it. Yeah,
I knew where you were going.
yeah. And I do too.
Some telepathy there, I think.
Yeah.
No, I know, I serve on the E-Task Force here with the Chamber, and it's amazing to me to understand where underserved is. There are places in which, again, you wouldn't think are. And I think that the notion is too, that there's the notion of access and there is the notion of affordability as well too.
Yep, both.
And I think it's our vision and aim to try to hopefully scratch both of those itches in that particular regard too. And we're excited about the opportunities ahead. That not necessarily is not part of this business plan formally, but again, it's on our radar. So very, very good point.
Yeah.
Well taken.
I echo that.
I think, just speaking of maybe not being in the business plan, but it's in our ideas, is as an organization, we need to have goals set
Yep.
so that we can measure up against those as we go.
Yep.
Yeah, just reiterating again, and it's not even just black and brown, but our rural communities are also,
Yep.
where it's usually predominantly white in these areas, they're also just really suffering from the access, which that community was saying. So what are our measures and how are we going to hold ourselves accountable to that?
It's a great point, and we will. I think we'll be watching this very closely and measuring ourselves. I do, some of the utilities that just began the last few years in this, for instance, Johnson City just started a couple of years ago with their broadband rollout. And they said the problem they're having, a good problem, is everybody wants it tomorrow and haven't figured out that plan, but they have laid out a formal plan, so you know where you're at in the queue. But you're spot on. We got to measure this. We got to get to those folks who are underserved. We got a lot of folks that we realize are underserved, kiddos in Knoxville, but also rural communities, and then improving our reliability in our circuits. So it's going to be if we get approved ultimately long term, it's going to be something we have to tackle very seriously. And I like to think we can beat 7 years. I'm going to press hard if we do, but realistic, it's 5,000 miles of wire to hang, and it's a lot of work. But it's something we've got to measure very carefully and determine success by multiple measures. Yeah.
I think it really speaks to the role that public power plays in serving everybody and providing that access to everybody. So we're excited about that. again, I think it's that total value proposition of both being an electric utility and a prospective broadband provider. But absolutely want to be held accountable on achieving those goals, because I think it's central to who we are.
Just a clarification on what we're going to be asked to do in a minute. Assuming somebody makes a motion and seconds, this is the first step. If we pass the resolution that's before us today, we're not committing to creating broadband service.
That's correct.
Or can we?
What we are, or, yes. So what we are really doing, and the reason why I'm supportive at this point, is we're sending this business plan to the state.
Yes.
We're going to get feedback from the state about what they like, what they don't like, and so what we would have to change to get their permission to move forward with this. That seems to me to be important information for us to have before we take the next step, because if they come back with something that's going to cost us more money to do, or they put some restrictions on something we want to do upon which we have based a financial forecast. So from my perspective, this is giving us access to another set of data, regulatory data, state data, that we can use in determining whether we take the next step.
Yeah, there's a checklist that they follow, and it really is just an opinion of whether your plan is feasible or not. And as we have said, as we've constructed these plans, this is how KUB can do it. This is at least our best option of how we think this can work, and ultimately the feedback would be whether it's feasible or not under the parameters that we've laid out.
Right.
So absolutely. So what you are, to answer your question directly, is what you're approving is literally just authorization of the president and CEO to submit those plans, and ultimately acknowledge that you've seen them and that you acknowledge their submittal is approved.
And I'll go one step further. We can't do any more than that. We couldn't approve the fiber division. None of that can happen without this plan. So this is all we can do at this point. We have to, so the state has to have a say in it. We'll get that say over the next, hopefully, couple months, and then go from there. But the state law is very, very codified on what you can and can't do, and this is the step we have to take first.
Jamie, I have one more question, going back to the whole idea of smart grid and what this fiber would enable us to do that we can't necessarily do now, or maybe not do as well right now. Our meters that we have, our smart meters, are operating on wireless technology, and while it seems like we haven't been in that business that long, there's some of them that have been out there longer than others. Yes. So I'm assuming that if we go this route and we have the fiber build out, that perhaps in the next generation of those meters, we may go with something that is wired through the fiber as opposed to wireless.
Perhaps.
About how many years, just ballpark, are we before we're looking at starting to replace some of those meters?
So if we think in the terms of this, let's say this network takes 7 years to build out. If we assume that to be, again, a foundational platform, that 7 years, we've had some of those meters that have been out on the system now, some as recent as 1 year, but some as much as 5. It puts us in a range of, let's just call it 5 to 10 years. Okay. If you assumed a technological life. I think the asset will last longer,
right,
but a technological cycle of 15 years, you're probably within 5 to 10 years of wanting a solution in that particular regard. We love our wireless system, let me say that. We use this fiber to connect the towers that will read those meters. But just an example, we've talked about I call it the hills and hollers of East Tennessee. Why would we want to change over? Well, again, we thought prospectively we'd have to have 11 towers. East Tennessee has proven a good challenge to this technology. We have 24. And so from that knowledge of it frees us up to take a look at other vendors down the road, to work with our current vendor on a little bit of a hybrid solution with a wired solution. It just gives us opportunities down the road. It's almost like the home battery thing. We don't know what advanced metering looks like in 10 years. 10 years before we chose our meters, they looked very different than what we were ultimately be able to buy. So it is a great time of innovation and technology in the utility space. A long answer to your question, but about 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who's put a tremendous amount of time into this. At $702 million, this probably would be the largest public project in my lifetime that I've been able to witness. So a lot of careful consideration, I think, needs to be made. Just some observations from a positive standpoint. We need to do the grid modernization, and the fiber to the premises is a revenue recovery piece for that, which is great. Improve reliability for the electric system, economic development, downward pressure on rates from the incumbent providers. As soon as we jump in, they're gonna lower rates. So even if you don't take our fiber, most likely people will experience some rate reduction. It could also force the incumbents to spend some money on some upgrades, which is beneficial. Getting fiber to unserved or underserved, which we talked about, is a positive. Better customer service through KUB. I think everybody agrees that local folks, they care about their neighbors. Better products. Who knows if and when they'll get the speeds up to where we are, but we could always stay one step ahead. My concerns are that, at 9%, this is a burden. This is a burden to electric ratepayers. I mean, it's going to be a lot, especially ones that don't have a need for fiber. I think about, my aunt who doesn't particularly have a need for fiber, she's 80 years old. So there are going to be a lot of folks supporting this program, and it's a community program. People also pay taxes that go to support the school system too, even though they don't have kids necessarily in school. But low income and fixed income folks is something to spend some time considering. It's not an insignificant rate increase. Debt to the electric system concerns me. That's a significant amount of debt. Potential for ballooning costs. I mentioned it earlier. Inflation of materials, commodities, and labors. We know some of these projects we've bid, when we rebid them, they go up 30%. So assumptions can sometimes be tricky things. I worry about disrupting technologies. This is a 7-year build-out. There's any number of new technologies that can enter, and we're putting hard lines in the ground and on the poles. Existing technologies, just a cursory study of 5G, they're saying everybody's going to have a gig in their pocket. So I worry about disrupting technologies in the midst of this process because we're so capital intensive.
John, I don't think that we're being asked today to make the leap that you're talking about.
I'm just going over some of my concerns, and let me say this: that there is this is a first step, but this also is when the train leaves the station, and I think about some of the people who cannot be in the room that want to say things about this train, and it's a significant investment, and I will say that I'm going to vote yes, but I have some significant reservations, and I'll be interested as we go along to see more data, to see more options, because I think there are a lot of ratepayers that this is going to be a significant thing.
Well, I'm going to move for approving the resolution to authorize the filing of the fiber to the home business plan with the Office of the Comptroller of the Treasury for the state of Tennessee.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the board on this resolution? Seeing none, are there any other comments from board members? Okay, Mr. Coley, call the roll.
Commissioner Askew.
Aye.
Commissioner Caballero.
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Small.
Aye.
Commissioner Worden.
Aye.
Resolution 1433 is passed.
Very good, thank you. There's no president's report this month. I have an announcement for our next meeting. Our April financial session will focus on the details of the fiscal year 2022 budget and update on the long-range plans. We'll begin with a brief business meeting at 10 o'clock. Public comments will be welcome before the meeting is adjourned. Following the conclusion of this brief meeting, we'll begin the budget workshop, and that session will conclude around noon, so please budget your time to be here at least from 10 to noon. Are there any members of the public who wish to address the board today on any subject? Don't see any. In that case, following the adjournment of this meeting, the board will have a lunch session that is open for the public to observe. This meeting is adjourned.